Can you give your perspective? You have been part of think tank of NGRBC, right? What do you think is the way to drive business responsibility through NGRBC, ESG to brands, unlisted companies, MSMEs?
Thanks, everyone. Congratulations, and thank you to the panelists, for everyone who's participating. I think in the first instance, Sandeep, we must avoid, as far as possible, using euphemisms like accident and safety. The world has come to a point in this discourse where the single lens that we will use to judge anything that comes in the social category as a human rights lens. There is no other option available. This is the UN Guiding Principles of 2011, which informs both the environment, because we have a human right to a clean and safe environment, and so forth. The NGRBCs were, I think, a magnificent effort to place correctly these issues in the interest, ultimately, of not only the worker, but the corporation, the country, our performance, and which is why there is no other approach that can yield the results expected from the state, from corporations, and if both fail or don't perform adequately well, then the question of remedy, access to remedy, national, local, international, the works. The second is that if you look at a path-breaking comment that India made in her national guidelines, look at Principle 3, and I've mentioned this in the chat. It is workers and their families. The human rights impact on a family of somebody who has just lost a limb or a hand, unable to work, is now disabled, impacts their right, their discrimination against such people, their livelihood, the impact on the girl child, and so forth. It's not just a worker injury and a workplace issue. It's a human rights issue at the home. Just as migrant workers coming to thousands of kilometers to a new location will express the same thing. So I think that the days ahead, some comment has been made on BRSR in just 30 seconds here. This is the report that I draw your attention to. It followed the national guidelines. And in the evolution of this first time, 1,000 companies, it's over the next month or so that for the first time, we in India will have access to reporting on a common template based on the NGRBCs. Its evolution will include sector-specific reporting. Its evolution will include applicability to unlisted companies. Its evolution will include, when I say will, it's a recommendation, so when the recommendations are acted upon, will include small, medium enterprise in certain categories, will include special supplements, maybe gender supplements, maybe supplements on supply chain on critical human rights issues relevant to our country. And we foresee this evolution based on the analysis of the 1,000 reports that are shortly going to be on our desk, and many of us are critically involved in looking at this. Having said this, my sense is that my own personal interest, of course, working on an understanding of implementing the United Nations Guiding Principles on business and human rights here domestically, in India's own interest, in the interest of businesses, and in the interest, obviously, of workers and their families who suffer these devastating adverse impacts on their human rights through accidents, preventable accidents at the workplace. This is the sum of the challenge before us, but it's a historic day. It's a historic time. This is the first time in India, I mean, after independence and before independence, obviously, that we are going to get the 1,000 reports that we've been waiting for, to analyze them, to further inform our strategies. Last point, if I may, that if one has anything to do with a future national guideline, I was involved, as Garima mentioned, in 2011 and 18 with the respective guidelines. The fact of the matter is I endorse completely what Dev has just talked about, the relationship between the economic and the ESG. ESG And until we do this, we know that in the government sector, and this is not unique to the government sector, up to 85% of labor violations in the workplace arise out of faulty commercial practices such as purchasing, vendor selection, etc. If that is the root cause, ultimately, in whether cutting corners, tired workers, overtime, lack of safety training, etc., then I think that we have to find ways of including the economic, because ultimately the question is, in this whole discourse, are we not attempting to internalize these externalized costs? A girl child dropping out of school, a person with disability, unemployment, discrimination. Who is bearing the cost? We as taxpayers. But this has to be integrated into the cost, just in the same way that coal has become more expensive to use as an energy commodity than non-renewables in the last decade, because of the internalization of issues of displacement, land acquisition, accidents, pollution, climate change, and so forth. And that is why the economic aspect, I completely endorse Dev's several remarks on the commercial and economic. Thank you very much, Sandeep.
Thank you, Viraf. That's a very insightful as always. And finally, Sachin Sachdeva is here, and he said the same thing: the lack of concern for safety. How much of this is a business decision involving profits or systemic issues, and how much of this is a callous or indifferent approach of industry? So, I think the good news is Bajaj is following that principle, hopefully more, and accelerates it. But Viraf makes some really powerful points that it's not just worker but families, and we shouldn't forget that. It's a loss to country, it's a loss to individuals, it's a loss to business ultimately.